Mayor's daughter received a sentence that left the entire courtroom. Applauding, her heels clicked across the marble floor, long before anyone saw her, and someone murmured, almost in disbelief, "She's really walking in like she owns the place." Lila Kamen didn't slow down. She brushed past reporters, brushed past the families waiting for their own cases, brushed past the whispers that rose like heat behind her. The mayor's daughter didn't acknowledge a single one of them. Her attention stayed fixed on her phone, thumb drifting across the screen, as if the world would pause until she finished texting. She reached the courtroom doors, handed her designer coat to an aide without looking up, and pushed inside as though entering a private salon reserved for the Camden family. Heads turned instantly. People recognized her from the footage, her laughing in the driver's seat minutes before the crash, her shrug during the arrest, the thin smile she gave the cameras as her father stood behind her, insisting the situation was being handled. Inside the room, conversation softened to a low murmur. Mateo Ruiz's relatives sat in the second row, their eyes tightening at the sight of her. A woman whispered to her husband, "She doesn't look worried at all." He didn't answer. He just watched Lila walk. She finally lifted her gaze, not to acknowledge the people whose lives she had shaken, but to glance at the judge's bench with a casual expectation that felt almost rehearsed. She gave a faint nod as if greeting someone beneath her and took her seat without waiting for permission. The way she crossed her legs, the way she flicked her hair over her shoulder, the way she exhaled in mild annoyance at the crowded room. The posture alone delivered her message. This wasn't a reckoning. This was an inconvenience. Her father slipped into the row behind her, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Lila didn't turn to him. She didn't need to. The reputation of his office sat on her shoulders like an inherited shield, and she wore it with the entitlement of someone raised to believe consequences were optional. The bailiff called for order. Papers rustled. The gallery settled. But Lila didn't. Her expression remained untouched, smug, confident, almost bored. And as the judge entered, she didn't rise with urgency. She rose slowly, deliberately, letting the room see exactly what she believed, that nothing here, not the charge, not the victim, not the truth, could possibly touch her. That single moment set the entire day's tone, like the first crack in a storm that no one yet realized would break open. A thin stack of papers slid across the bench, and the clerk began reading the charges. Someone in the gallery whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "Reckless driving, obstruction, threatening a witness. How many lives can one night ruin?" The words hung in the air, sharp enough to carve through the courtroom's stillness. Lala didn't react. She leaned back in her chair and let her eyes drift toward the ceiling, her boredom so deliberate it felt choreographed. When the clerk reached the part about her invoking her father's office during the arrest, she didn't blink. Her foot tapped, not from nerves, but from impatience, like a student forced to sit through a lecture she considered beneath her. The prosecutor recounted the night of the crash, the downtown street still busy, the speeding car, the bakery worker stepping off the curb with 2 bags of day-old bread for the shelter, the impact that threw him onto the pavement, the driver who never got out to check if he was alive. The voice caught on an officer's body cam. "Do you know whose daughter I am?" Those words echoed now, heavier than any legal statute. The judge folded his hands and asked her a simple question. "Do you understand the seriousness of these charges?" She offered a single, dismissive nod, the kind that barely moved her chin. It was the kind of nod given by someone who believed the conclusion had already been arranged behind closed doors. Someone certain that power was thicker than accountability. Across the aisle, Mateo Ruiz's family sat without speaking. His wife's fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. His brother stared at the floor. Hope and fear lived together in their eyes. Hope that the truth might finally matter. Fear that the Camden name might smother it before it could breathe. A ripple ran through the room as people absorbed what the case represented. Not just a crash, not just a moment of recklessness. A question larger than the defendant herself. Would justice apply to someone raised to believe she was untouchable? The prosecutor ended his summary with evidence of Lila's attempts to interfere with the investigation. Late-night calls, messages, a threat to the friend who tried to call 911. Lila barely glanced up, The low murmur from the gallery suggested that others finally understood what she had expected all along, that this case was supposed to disappear quietly. But it hadn't. And now the eyes of the entire town were fixed on her. The judge looked down from the bench. "We will proceed with testimony." A small shift in the room followed, the collective inhale of people preparing for something that mattered. Lila, however, remained perfectly still, perfectly unbothered, as if the next chapter of her life was already written in her favor. A man in the gallery muttered, "Watch her face. She's getting annoyed." And he was right. Something sharpened in Lila Camden the moment the prosecutor asked his third question. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was irritation. Clean, cold, and unmistakable. "Miss Camden," the prosecutor began, "why did you refuse to provide a statement that night?" She let out a breath that carried the weight of someone forced into chores. "Because your officers were swarming me like I was some criminal. It was dark. It was chaotic. People were shouting things. I didn't trust that anything I said wouldn't be twisted." Her father shifted behind her, shoulders tight. Someone whispered his name, but he kept his eyes on the floor, as though distance might shield him from the spectacle his daughter was becoming. The prosecutor continued, "You didn't see the man you hit?" She smiled without warmth. "I saw confusion. I saw people running toward the car. Poor street lighting. Panicked civilians. It was unsafe for me. I left because I didn't feel protected." A wave of murmurs rolled through the gallery, astonishment mixed with disbelief. Mateo Ruiz's wife closed her eyes, pressing her fingers to her lips. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Unsafe for you? The man on the pavement is the one who left in an ambulance." Lila's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but she recovered quickly. She turned her head toward the victim's attorney and whispered, loudly enough to be heard, "He's being dramatic. They all are." The attorney lifted his brow. "You believe the injuries were exaggerated?" She shrugged. "People love attention." The air tightened. Even the judge's clerk stopped writing. "Miss Camden," the judge said, "you will keep your comments respectful." She didn't look at him. "I am being respectful." A low rumble of disbelief spread across the room. The prosecutor tried again. "You fled the scene. You ordered your friends not to call for help. You threatened a witness. Are you denying any of this?" Her jaw tightened. "I denied nothing. I explained the circumstances. Explain the part where you told your passenger, 'My dad will fix it.'" Her eyes narrowed. "Taken out of context." Another whisper from the gallery. "She's digging her own grave." The judge spoke again. "Miss Camden, that's your second warning." She waved a hand. "I hear you." It didn't sound like she did. Her father leaned forward, whispering something meant only for her, but she pulled her arm away with a sharp movement, as though even his concern annoyed her. The prosecutor stepped back for a moment, almost studying her. "Is it your position," he asked, "that everyone else here misunderstood your actions, except you?" "Yes," she said, with absolute certainty. And there it was, the spark, the blazing confirmation that her arrogance wasn't a rumor or a rumor's exaggeration. It was real. It was bold. It was now on full display. The judge watched her in silence, as though measuring the widening gap between her entitlement and the truth slowly gathering around her. By the time the questioning paused, the courtroom no longer saw a privileged young woman under pressure. They saw a fuse burning towards something explosive. A single sentence from the witness stand cut through every whisper in the room. "I remember the sound of her laughing right before the car hit me." The words came from Mateo Ruiz, the bakery worker who had spent weeks learning how to walk again. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't tremble. He simply told the truth, piece by piece, as if laying bricks along a path the court would be forced to follow. He spoke about the evening delivery run he made every night, the bags of unsold bread he carried to the shelter 2 blocks away, the steps he took off the curb seconds before the headlights rushed toward him. "I didn't even have time to react," he said. "One moment I was upright. The next I was on the ground asking myself if I was dying." His daughter tightened her fingers around his arm. She had been the one who found him in the hospital, confused and bandaged, asking why the police kept avoiding direct answers about who hit him. He described the surgeries, the lost wages, the fear that he would lose the bakery job entirely. Then, with a slow breath, he admitted the part that weighed heaviest on him. I was scared her family would make the whole thing disappear. People told me not to fight it. They said her last name was stronger than anything I could say. The room's silence thickened. Even the steady shuffle of papers from the clerk stopped. Everyone listened. Everyone except Lila. She leaned toward her attorney and muttered, "He's adding drama. I didn't hit him that hard." Her lawyer tried to hush her, but the judge had already turned his eyes toward her, noticing the way she dismissed every word spoken by the man whose life she had rearranged. The prosecutor approached the screen near the bench. "Mr. Ruiz," he said, "this is the street camera footage from that night." He pressed play. The courtroom watched the yellow light ahead, watched Lila's car accelerate instead of slow, watched the silhouettes inside the vehicle, Lila laughing, her friends cheering something inaudible. Watched the moment the bakery worker stepped into the crosswalk. The impact was small on the video, almost unreal in its simplicity, but the human consequences filled the room. Lila crossed her arms and stared away from the screen, lips tight, jaw set. Someone in the second row whispered, "She's not even looking." Another said, "She thinks she's untouchable." The judge observed her carefully. The irritation, the refusal to acknowledge anything on the screen, the complete absence of regret. Mateo continued quietly, "I keep thinking about how it would have gone if it were me who hit her. If I had sped up at a yellow light, if I had left the scene, if I had refused to speak to police." His eyes lifted toward Lila. "I would have been in jail before sunrise." A shifting wave of anger moved through the gallery. People exchanged glances, some stunned, some outraged, some simply tired of watching power win over truth. The prosecutor asked one final question. "Mr. Ruiz, what do you want from today?" "Only acknowledgement," he answered. "I want her to understand that I'm a person, not an inconvenience." For the first time, Lila said nothing, but her silence wasn't remorse. It was annoyance at the scrutiny tightening around her. And in that moment, the courtroom saw the fracture, the crumble behind the polished name, the truth pushing through the cracks of her privilege, a truth that would not disappear this time. Her friend's voice was the first thing to break the tension. I don't want to say anything that hurts her," she murmured, eyes locked on Lila, as if begging for silent instructions. But Lila didn't look back. For the first time all morning, she kept her gaze fixed on the defense table, jaw tight, nails pressed into her palms, like she was trying to hold her whole life together with force alone. The judge waited, the courtroom waited, and the girl on the stand folded. "She told us not to talk about it," she finally said. "She said the crash wasn't as serious as people were making it out to be. She didn't want anyone to exaggerate." A quiet murmur moved through the back rows. Not loud enough to be disorderly, just enough to say everyone heard it. The judge leaned forward. "Did she ask you to conceal any details related to the incident?" The girl tried to answer, but her voice thinned into nothing. She looked at Lila again, desperate for some kind of signal. Lila blinked hard, once, like a warning, like a plea. But the witness broke anyway. "She said we should pretend nothing happened. She said her dad would handle it." The words hit harder than any accusation the prosecution could have crafted. Because this wasn't strategy. This wasn't a legal argument. This was the truth leaking out from someone who couldn't carry the weight of it anymore. The judge thanked her and called the next witness. A boy this time. Nervous, hands shaking, but too tired to lie. She was terrified, and he said, "Not about the crash, about the fallout. She kept saying she couldn't get in trouble before graduation. Then she told us to keep quiet. And when the police didn't charge her right away, she said, 'See, I told you. My dad made a few calls.'" Lila's head snapped up. She whispered something sharp to her attorney, but he didn't respond. He was too busy watching the judge's expression reshape itself, calm, stern, sharpening like a blade. When the judge began questioning her directly, the air thinned again. "Ms. Marin, did you use your father's office to influence the investigation?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. For weeks, she'd been quick, smug, unshakable, shielded by confidence and family reputation. But now, with the courtroom silent and every lie collapsing at her feet, she froze. The judge repeated the question. Slower this time. Did you attempt to leverage your father's position to affect the handling of this case? I... No, she said, but the denial cracked halfway through, splintering at the edges. I didn't. I... No? No one moved. No one breathed. The prosecutor slid a folder across the table. Your Honor, phone records, multiple calls from Ms. Marin to police leadership between midnight and 3 a.m., immediately following the crash. It was the last defense she had, the last wall still standing, and it fell without a sound. Lila's face drained of color. Her attorney closed his eyes, and the judge looked down at her with an expression that wasn't anger or disappointment or even surprise. It was recognition. The moment someone finally stops running from their own truth. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Ms. Marin, he said, your story no longer aligns with reality. She stared at him like she'd been struck, breath trembling, the courtroom closing in on her. For the first time, the lie she'd built her entire defense upon was gone, and the truth stood alone between her and the rest of the world, undeniable, unmovable, waiting for whatever came next. A single phrase from the judge lands with a force that no one in the room is prepared for. Stand up. It isn't loud, but it carries a weight that pulls every breath from the air. Lila rises slowly, the last trace of defiance slipping from her posture. For the first time since the crash, she looks small, not because of guilt, but because the shield of her father's influence no longer fits around her. The judge studies her with a calm that feels sharper than anger. He speaks of the fragility of a community that trusts its leaders, of the damage caused when the powerful treat consequences as optional. He tells her that privilege isn't armor, and that the most dangerous lie a person can believe is that their life matters more than the people they hurt. She tries to respond, a stumble of words that never fully form, but the room is already hearing something larger than her excuses. Her father lowers his eyes, elbows resting on his knees, unable to meet anyone's gaze as the judge lays bare the truth he spent months trying to cover. The gallery leans forward, not hungry for punishment, but for the clarity unfolding in front of them. This is the moment when the case stops being about a collision on a city street and becomes a collision between entitlement and accountability. The tension tightens, almost unbearable, as the judge closes the folder in front of him. The soft click echoes through the room like a signal. The sentencing is coming, and everyone feels its weight before a single word is spoken. A single gasp breaks the silence before anyone understands what they've just heard. The judge's voice is steady, almost gentle, as he lays out the sentence. Not a prison term, not the quiet, negotiated consequence people expected from a mayor's daughter, but something far more unescapable. She will spend 1 full year working in the same bakery where Mateo once stood behind the counter. She will see him every morning, not as a footnote in her case, but as a person she nearly erased. She will repay every dollar he lost while he healed, and every week she will sit in a public forum where the town can question her, challenge her, remind her that accountability doesn't expire when the headlines fade. For a moment, no one moves. Even Lila looks as if the world has tilted beneath her. She whispers, "At the bakery?" As though the word itself stings. The judge simply nods, reminding her that justice isn't meant to humiliate, but to rebuild what someone else broke. Her father presses both hands to his face, not in anger, but in the quiet collapse of a man who finally understands that influence has limits. The gallery rises like a wave, applause rolling through the room, not because the punishment is harsh, but because it finally feels honest, restorative, human. Lila doesn't cry, doesn't argue. She only stares at the floor as if the tiles themselves are delivering a truth she spent her whole life avoiding. For the first time, privilege offers her nothing. The sentence isn't a chapter closing. It's a beginning she never imagined for herself, one the entire town will witness, day after day, until the lesson becomes something she can no longer outrun. The first question shouted at her isn't about guilt. It's about who she'll be now. Microphones crowd her path, flashes burst across her face, and for once, she doesn't lift her chin to meet them. A reporter calls the sentence humiliating. Another calls it historic. But the only voice that seems to reach her is the quiet one behind her. the lingering applause drifting through the courthouse doors like a reminder she can't outrun. Mateo steps outside a few minutes later, offering no speeches, no boasts. He simply thanks the judge, his hand around his daughter's shoulder, their relief soft but unmistakable. When someone asks if he's satisfied, he answers, "Justice isn't revenge, it's repair." The words follow Lila down the stairs like a shadow she's never noticed before. She moves through the cameras without her usual smirk, her father trailing behind her, no longer able to shield her with his presence. She pauses at the sidewalk just once and turns back to the courthouse, the same place she expected to walk out triumphant, untouched, the world bent around her last name. Now she stands there stripped of the illusions she carried in with her. Not broken, but confronted. The town feels different in that moment. People who once whispered about corruption now speak openly about accountability. A community that feared its voice had gone unheard finally feels the ground steady beneath it again. The judge's sentence becomes the story on every corner, not because it embarrassed her, but because it reminded them all that justice can be both stern and humane. Lila takes a breath that looks like the first honest one she's taken all year. Whether she learns from this or resents it, no one can know. Not yet. Growth doesn't happen in courtrooms. It happens in places like bakeries at 5 in the morning, in sinks full of dishes, in conversations she cannot dodge, in work she cannot delegate. But as she steps into the car and the door closes behind her, there is a faint clarity in her eyes as if something long dormant has finally stirred. The case didn't just hand down consequences. It cracked open a space where truth finally reached her. The courtroom didn't break her. It woke her.